Shawn Wilson, from the Opaskwayak Cree Nation in northern Canada, is a researcher, teacher, and storyteller who reminds us that research itself can be ceremony. Now based on Syilx territory in British Columbia, Shawn's work spans continents, from Turtle Island to Australia, grounded always in relationships and respect for Indigenous knowledge systems. In this conversation, he reflects on what it means to live a life of ceremony, to see the universe as a web of relationships, and to change the world by changing how we relate to one another. We also laugh about big words, like epistemology and ontology, and celebrate his joyful self-proclaimed title, IndigiNerd. For Shawn, research is not just a method, it's a way of life. Chwant Eskenahe.
Bonjour. Welcome to Tending Our Roots with Indigenous Methodologies, where we explore Indigenous approaches to research, evaluation, and community practice.
Our conversations center how Indigenous knowledges and ways of being address the structural limits of Western frameworks. This podcast is a living resource for those nurturing the health, healing, and futures of Indigenous communities.
I'm Mikas Gonzalez.
And I'm Jill Fish.
Bonjour, Shawn. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are very excited to have you and definitely excited to get started with our questions. So, in research is ceremony. You write that research isn't just about knowledge production, it's a relational and spiritual act. Research is ceremony. Is it a metaphor, a methodology, or a call to action? How do you see this concept evolving in your own work today?
All three, probably. It's a way of life, I would say. So maybe it's a philosophy, because it's not just necessarily research that's ceremony. I think it speaks to the intentionality of how you go about living your life. So you can do your research in a ceremonial way. You can record a podcast in a ceremonial way. You can do lots of things in a ceremonial way. To me, it's kind of comes down to the intentionality of how you go about doing things. So it's, I guess when I start thinking about, and I don't know how many big words you want me to use or if I should try to avoid them, but I have a tendency to use big words. And it's like totally unnecessary sometimes. But I realize that also sometimes those big words are kind of like gatekeeper things that stop people from actually engaging with their ideas. So I try not to use them, but sometimes it's easier when you use them because they're like shorthand for a whole bunch of ideas stuck together. I think if we start to think about how Indigenous folk think and like our knowledge systems and how we go understanding the universe around us, I guess. So our cosmology. So thinking about our whole universe, our cosmos, and how we understand that universe is our cosmology. So thinking about our universe and thinking about it as being relational, which to me means that we're a bit more concerned about the relationships between things than we are necessarily with the things themselves. So like a lot of our traditional languages are really heavily verb-based, or they talk about the relationship that you have with something rather than something. So it's like, this isn't necessarily a coffee cup. It's the thing I'm drinking out of. So it's that, or it's the vessel for holding water or coffee or whatever. So it's that concept. So we just start to think about everything that is as being relational. How much do you want me to get into like deep philosophical shit, or do you want to just like?
I just want to say, Shawn, you taught me big words. When I started reading your papers early on in grad school, I was like, epistemology, ontology, axiology. I was like, what is he talking about? And then now they're just a regular part of my vocabulary in my own work in Indigenous methodology. So I get the gatekeeper thing. And I also think it makes sense to talk about it both ways. But I think maybe something that would be really cool to hear about is how this ceremonial work in research has continued to evolve in your recent work and this idea of continuing research as ceremony.
That's really hard to pin down because again, it's not just doing research or it's not just engaging in ceremony. It's just like a becomes a whole way of life. Um, I think when you start engaging with the universe in like an indigenous sort of way and seeing everything as relational, then when you are doing research, what you're really trying to do is build more relationships with ideas so you better understand something, right? So whatever your research topic is, try to build a better relationship with that research topic so that knowledge and understanding can come to you. Uh, and then you have to incorporate that knowledge and understanding in how you go about living your life because it is relational knowledge, right? So it's how things relate. So you have to engage in that relationship. So I guess part of my own maturation, I suppose, as a researcher and as a person is understanding more and more about the relationships between things. And the more I understand about things and the more connections I start to see between different things, it also then sort of gives me more responsibility to act in appropriate ways so that I'm living up to my responsibilities and roles in all these relationships that I'm developing. So, uh, when I first wrote Research as Ceremony, I was a graduate student myself. So you have different sort of roles and responsibilities as a graduate student than you do. And now, like I'm a more senior academic. I don't like using necessarily the word senior, but a bit more of an established academic. And a lot of my role now is more um, focused on helping graduate students develop their own ceremonies and develop their own methodologies and their own ways of doing things so that they are engaging in their own ceremonies. So it's kind of evolved more into me not necessarily leading as much research now as it is guiding students into how to do their own research, which is really cool. So that's a big part of my role now, I guess, is training other people how to do research. Although I got to say, I still do my own research as well. So the big project I'm working on right now is continuing the ceremony of research. So it's kind of doing research as ceremony part two. So I'll be going out and talking with this sort of new breed of elders that we have now who are academic elders. So there are now an older generation of Indigenous academics who have been doing research from Indigenous ways of doing things now for the last 20 years or whatever, and are have established themselves in the academy. So they have a different way of they have a different role now as sort of academic elders. Uh, so talking with academic elders about how they went through the system, what sort of uh, their understanding of Indigenous methodologies are, and then also working with more graduate students again and picking out what different graduate students are doing around the world, Indigenous graduate students. And so I'll be working with 4 or 5 of my own doctoral students and going around and talking to a whole bunch of other doctoral students around the world to see what's like the new and upcoming things in Indigenous methodologies these days and try to articulate something that kind of maybe holds us all together. So that's for me, it's really fun. So I get to go around and talk to doctoral students about all this sort of academic stuff, which for a nerd like me is pretty good.
I'd love to know, do you have, because I'm sure each person's relationship with ideas or their research practices or whatever it might be is different, right? Each person's way of doing things might be slightly different. Are there practical ways that you help guide these young people in finding that for themselves?
Ooh, I don't know about practical. Most of my stuff is pretty impractical. and, a lot of the time, it's just sometimes being an asshole and getting them to realize because it's like, I don't know, we have traditional roles in our different cultures, right? And one of them is a trickster. And oftentimes, uh, you can deliberately act in a way that may not be culturally appropriate in order to get people to shift their thinking or to sort of, you may be mimicking something that they're doing wrong and like over exaggerating it or whatever to help people. Uh, so that's one of the things I do is sometimes it's just being an asshole and like pointing out things that are ridiculous or um, it can be quite difficult sometimes too because we all have our own past traumas and past issues that we're all dealing with. So you have to be really careful because once in a while I do trigger someone's past, you know, uh, a trauma response, and then because it's like maybe I tease them a little bit too hard there. Um, but so that's one of the things I do sometimes is act in unexpected ways in order to point out some of the things that people are doing or thinking about that need to change. Um, but a lot of the time, though, it's just really helping them to look at what their own culture is, uh, like from a nation group down to like a specific family and an individual. We all have our own cultures and our own ways of expressing how we do things. So, really helping people to understand why they're doing things the way they do them. Is that like for all of your nation, or is that just a family thing, or is that just a you thing? And understand the underlying reasons behind that, and then develop from there their own cultural metaphors that they can use to better understand a system for creating knowledge and understanding, um, and going from just having a whole bunch of information into creating a system for making sense of that information so that it becomes useful for our communities. Um, I guess that's mostly what I do, is help them to understand their own cultures a little bit better, how that interacts with their own personal positionality, uh, and then how that put that into use in a way that helps them to create more knowledge, or not necessarily create more knowledge, but sometimes it's articulating knowledge that's already there. They just don't know how to get it out. So I don't know if that's practical or not. Quite often it's impractical.
No, I love that answer. And it's a big role too that you take on, right? And that more of us need to take on in order for that shift to happen, as you talk about. And it's a kind way, right? To take it on in that way as like a trickster, as something that sort of comes at it from a humorous standpoint. In a sense, like you say, you bring an asshole, but I'm sure your students and those who follow you in your work learn a lot from you in ways that don't always bring up shame or guilt or anything like that. So I appreciate that answer.
It's like that whole community thing about teasing. It has its good side, but it also has its bad side because it can be really shaming. But if we could do the good parts of it without the shaming parts, it's quite good. Yeah.
I think when we center relationships, that things like levity can be used in a good way to help people see something in a different way that they hadn't seen previously, and can be the catalyst for change or for momentum around developing a system that you're talking about, a different way of seeing things. And I think that's really important for Indigenous and Native communities, especially in academia, in a system that does not necessarily always center relationships. And so I'm curious, with all these talks about relationships between things, between people, if we could talk a little bit more about why relationships should be at the heart of research and why that is so important.
Oh man, you keep leading me back to the philosophical stuff, eh? So that's your role, is it, Jill? Vegas wants the practical, Jill wants the philosophical.
I'll say philosophy was my second major in undergrad, and I loved it, but I couldn't imagine philosophizing the rest of my life. And yet here I am.
That's cool. Yeah, although that's because kind of like I'm a research nerd, right? So it's like, yeah, doing all this philosophy stuff is fun. The importance of relationships, I would say, again, that's like, well, it's the fundamental basis of the whole universe. So I was trying to describe this to someone once, and it's like, some these things are really, really hard to describe without using metaphors or analogies or stories because they are complex thoughts that are really difficult to articulate, right? So if I say that the fundamental nature of the universe is that it's a relational thing, trying to break that down into like easily digestible component parts. If I think of, all right, so like Isaac Newton had his little apple that he helped to describe gravity, right? So I'll use a different kind of apple. So if I'm like looking at my phone, if you actually look at what this phone is made up of, not the intellectual property, but the physical components that are inside the phone. So it's made up of a whole bunch of different materials, like plastics and metals and whatever. Each of those individual things is like a chemical compound behind it, right? Each of those chemical compounds is made up of a whole bunch of molecules. Each of those molecules is made up of atoms. Each of those atoms is made up of a whole bunch of subatomic particles. The amount of space that's in an atom is actually massive compared to what is actually the subatomic particles, right? So the different atoms that make up a molecule. Again, it's the relationship between the atoms that holds them together to make a molecule. It's like that electron cloud thing that you may have remember from high school chemistry, right? It's all those relationships that actually hold the atoms together. It's the relationships between things, the little subatomic particles that hold everything together. But the amount of space between those things is massive compared to the actual things themselves. So if I was to take my phone and compress it down, remove all the space between subatomic particles, compress it down to its just solid thing with no space between them, it would be minuscule. We could compress down the entire Earth and remove all the space between all the things that are holding the Earth together. It would be like the size of a baseball, maybe. I'm not sure the exact size, but you get what I'm talking about. You compress down the entire sun down and take away all the space between things. It becomes so small and dense that it creates a black hole. So you think on that grand cosmic scale from the subatomic to the vastness of space, if you look at the vastness of space and the space between the planets and the suns and the stars, is massive compared to the actual tiny little things that are the planets and the suns and stars, right? So what makes the universe work is the relationships between those things. So it's relationships and the gravity forces and all the other things that are happening at the astronomical level and at the subatomic level that actually make everything work. So that in a physical sense, our universe is a whole bunch of relationships. Now you take that from that physical sense and start to expand it out. Well, that's the way that we understand what land is. That's the way that we understand what our whole human relationships are. It's like, when you're introducing yourself as an Indigenous person, you often say, well, the land that you're from or the people that you come from. Your important things are like the roles that you play, like a teacher or a student, and those roles change from time and place, right? Or as a grandchild or a grandparent, you could be both at the same time. Aunt, uncle, those things are incredibly important for us because we recognize that, well, that's what makes the universe what it is all of those relationships, right? So understanding all those, entire universe is made up of relationships. Then we could take that a little step further and say, all right, so we know that the whole universe is made up of relationships. So how we go about behaving in those relationships has the potential to change the fundamental nature of the universe. So to me, that is the great potential of research, but it's also the great responsibility of doing research is if you behave yourself properly in research relationships and gain more knowledge, gain more understanding of things, and use that knowledge in a good way, then you make the whole universe a better place. So I guess if you live according then to our traditional philosophical values and rules and laws, those laws are all about how to maintain harmony in relationship. And so we could just transport those into how we do research, understand more about the world, and make the whole universe a better place through behaving ourselves properly in research relationships, but all other relationships too. I totally got off topic there.
No, it was great. I will say I failed high school chemistry, and so you transported me back to another place in time.
See, I triggered your trauma response.
Yeah, I'm triggered. I'm triggered. And yet I understood it, and what I took from that is that relationships hold everything together.
Yes. Well, you said it a lot simpler than I did. Sometimes what you need is someone to just smack you on the back of the head. Just say,
No, I do think we need the metaphor, we need the story, we need all that to really understand. There's so many things that you said that took me from like my own little personal metaphor to metaphor. Like even when you picked up your phone to talk about chemistry that I don't remember either, I was thinking, oh, it's not the phone that's important. It's the relationships that we can maintain because the phone exists. Or sometimes the relationships that get hurt in some sense because of that whatever. So it is about the relationship, not the thing itself.
Mhm.
I'll end there because there was a lot going on, but I really do enjoy everything you just said.
Even though it is a bunch of philosophical BS a lot of the time, it's like, well, but it really comes down to everything is relationships. Just behave yourself properly.
Right, but it almost simplifies things for me, anyways, because because you can lean back on those instincts that we carry as Indigenous people to move forward in our work relationships, in our research, or whatever it might be, in a way that feels good to us, because that will feel good to the outcome of the work. Right? It simplifies it for me, and it feels doable. It feels like I can relax a little bit. That I am doing things okay, as long as I'm taking care of myself and what I know to be true as far as my Anishinaabe teachings, right?
Yeah, and I mean, all our teachings, every culture around the world has the teachings that teach you how to behave yourself properly. So really all you need to do is figure out what those teachings are and choose how you go about enacting those teachings in specific contexts. Like it's easy to say, well, just be a loving person. All right. Well, so how do I demonstrate love, or how do I be a loving person in this context or that person's context? And like how I demonstrate love is going to be different than how you demonstrate it. Because I'm in different relationships with you, and like how I demonstrate love with my children is going to be different than how I demonstrate love with you two, because it's like we have different sorts of relationships, right? So it's the context also is really important. Um, so that's where our critical thinking skills become important, because it's like, all right, so here's our traditional teachings about humility, or here's our traditional teaching about sharing, or here's our traditional teaching about whatever. Uh, it's up to you to use your critical thinking skills to say, well, how do I put that into action in this particular context around doing research, or into this particular context about parenting, or this particular context about dealing with my asshole uncle, or whatever, right? How do you put it into context dealing with Trump? Ooh, that's like the biggest challenge for trying to be a loving person.
I'm excited for this next question. And I was thinking, does this come back to the practical? We'll see. Indigenous knowledge is powerful and often sacred. How do we balance the need to foreground Indigenous knowledge and research with the need to protect it? What tensions arise, and how do we navigate them ethically?
I think a big part of what you learn and get better at as you mature is making that discernment between uh, what's relevant information and what's not relevant in this context. Because as you go through your life, you'll learn a bazillion different things. You'll get quadrillions and I don't know, whatever the bigger thing is after that. Megabytes of information coming at you. You have to use your own, well, your culture helps you to sort of parse out which bits of information are important and which aren't. But then it's also you'd have to use your own critical thinking to sort of say, oh, this bit of information is relevant for this context, and that's the bit of information I'm going to use right now. It's not relevant for this other context, so I'll leave it aside for that. So I think that's a really difficult thing for a lot of people to sort of understand, is that like you don't have to tell everything that you know every time you talk, right? Well, kind of figure that out as we go along. The same thing goes with research. It's like when you are doing your research project, you're going to learn way, 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 way more than you're ever going to be able to put down in a thesis or a research paper or your doctoral dissertation. It's, 300 pages, but it's still only going to be like the tip of the iceberg of what you actually learn. So part of that discernment process is really important. It's sort of figuring out, this is important for this context. These are the other things that are important for other contexts, but they don't need to be written down. So that also applies to that knowledge that you gain from your culture, that no, that knowledge is only for people that have reached this level of attainment, or it's only important in this context. And it is incredibly important in that context. So I want to make sure that it stays in that context. I'm not going to drag it out of that context and put it in this other context where people can abuse it or misuse it. So that's part of, I think, that responsibility and accountability, is understanding how that works, and sort of protecting knowledge becomes part of your relational accountability, and sort of saying, no, that knowledge belongs over here. I'm going to do what I can to make sure it stays over there. Like that may be creating some safeguards for it so it doesn't migrate online accidentally or whatever it is, right? But sometimes that's really difficult to discern. So that's where mentors and supervisors can help you to sort of, yeah, that's really important, but keep that's sweat lodge knowledge, keep it there. What are you going to pull out of that maybe some of the principles from that could help to guide how you write something, but you don't necessarily write about that thing itself.
I'm curious, do you have something from your own research experiences where you thought, should I or should I not share this, and how you navigated that?
Yeah, that happens all the time. Oh man. I don't know, that navigation of it gets easier as you get more, you start to learn the rules of both systems better. And the more I go along in Western academia, the more I realize they don't even know that. That I tend to share the minimum amount that I can in order to achieve whatever goal it is. Like, so share the minimum amount that's required in order to write a paper, share the minimum amount that's required to do a research project. And recognizing that the bulk of the stuff is going to stay in the community, or stay within with the people that I'm doing research with, who become the ultimate holders of that knowledge. So what I'm actually putting in writing is probably like the least amount I can get away with. But that's part of dealing with the academic system, is understanding, oh yeah, no, you have to put in this much. Any extra is like, well, no, I'll save that for another context. And I guess that, like, there's also like really, how would you put it, like layers of sacredness, I suppose. And so there's certain things that can be shared at certain times. But then there's also like, when you're doing this stuff, it's like, okay, I learned this specific piece of information. That piece of information can't be shared. But that piece of information helped me to understand this concept over here a little bit better. That concept can be shared potentially. Or maybe, oh, no, that concept still is kind of sacred. But that concept, when I link it with this other context, they give me a theory. I may be able to share that theory. So it's making that discernment like around, it's kind of like confidentiality. Say if you're like in a sharing circle or a talking circle, you can't share someone else's story, but you can share your own story from that circle. Or you can share the lesson that you learned. Oh, I learned about whatever today in the talking circle. You don't say you learned it from this specific person's story or what that story was. You could talk about what you learned. So it's kind of like that with research sometimes. It's kind of like, took part in this activity or this thing, whether that's through talking or whatever this knowledge was imparted on me, to me. I don't know, whatever. I gained this knowledge. That knowledge I'm not necessarily going to share, but it also helped me to understand this concept better, so I could share that concept. I think that's a really important distinction, I think, between knowing what levels to share.
It makes me think of the concept of trust, that there's different levels of trusting someone. And with that, there's different ways in which we have to share information for academic purposes or for research purposes. Um, and through that, we have to make decisions about how far that sharing goes. And I imagine many people are listening to this who are highly familiar with your work, but who are earlier on in their academic or their research trajectory, who are moved by these ideas, but are really wondering, how do I or how do we put these ideas into practice? So I think I'm left wondering what advice you would give to Indigenous researchers about how to cultivate their own ceremony on the ground, whether it's in their community, in the classroom, or their institution. What can they do to start this work?
It's really hard to tell someone where to start because it's impossible to know where they already are at. So it's kind of like you're the only one that can judge where you're starting from. Uh, so maybe actually that's probably the good starting point is figuring out where you are now in order to get a bit of guidance on where you need to go. Um, so oftentimes that's kind of look like personal journaling to sort of, well, and reflecting on your life experiences up to this date. And this is where I've got to now, which is, if you, again, it's like when you're dealing with relational knowledge, everything is contextual, right? So, because everything's in relationship, all those relationships change all the time and they're all based on the context around them. Hermeneutics, there you can go. Jill, a fancy word for you. There's a historical context.
I learned another word.
Hermeneutics is really well kind of like about the historical context, but it's like everything is context based, right? Including Indigenous knowledge. So it's like the knowledge that we are sharing here amongst the three of us kind of comes out because of the way that we're talking with each other, right? So if we would have another conversation 2 months from now, we're going to have a different conversation because we'll have different things that we're bringing into the conversation, different context. So a big part of that context is us. So it's me, myself. I am shaping the context around me. Each of you is as well. So it's important to be self-aware enough to understand how you are interacting with your personal context. So that's a good starting point, is creating self-awareness. So it's getting to understand, oh, this is my own personal philosophy. This is my cultural philosophy. These are the things that I'm bringing into this research process. That is the context that I'm become a research tool myself. People call me a tool all the time. I'll claim being a research tool. So you're bringing your own self into the context, into this research process. So that's a good starting point, is to figuring out your own positionality. So that's like, well, like we do positionality statements. That has become an important first step in writing up Indigenous research, is writing your positioning statement. And it's like every Indigenous research paper now that I read, people start off with an introduction of who they are, which is really important. It's like, okay, yeah, they understand now that they are situating themselves in the context. So it's like you might be doing a literature review. This is the historical context. This is the political context. This is the whatever that's happening around your research topic. But it's like you are the one that is doing this study. So you have to bring your own positionality into it as well. So that's a good starting point. And I think once people can start to understand their own positionality, oftentimes they realize that their culture has really useful tools, really useful metaphors to help them understand complex things.
Amazing. And so people have to know who they are, where they've been, their culture, their community, where their community's been, to know where they're going and the potential for where they can go with their culture and their community and themselves in these different contexts, and how perhaps who they are is shaped by these different contexts and ebbs and flows. But it opens up different possibilities for someone understanding where they are and how to move forward with Indigenous research in a good way.
Yeah, yeah. I think the one thing, when I was sort of thinking back to myself what I just said, one thing that we have to also be careful of is it's like, well, we all have our own cultures too, but I don't want to sort of say, well, you have to be following your traditional culture, because it's it's about that, yeah, your traditional culture, but it's also about your own personal culture right here and right now. Um, and that context can be incredibly important. So it's like I know a few students are really studying things like the 60s scoop and, well, the millennial scoop now, that it's taken way more kids away than the 60s scoop ever did. So there's lots and lots of Indigenous kids that have been removed from their families and their traditional cultures and brought up in Western culture. That doesn't mean you can't do Indigenous research. What it means is, okay, well, you were brought up in this Western culture. Understand it. Understand how that act of being removed from your traditional culture, it's impacting on you personally. And then you probably are going to have way, way, way better insights into a millennial scoop, or the 60s scoop, or whatever it is, than someone that didn't go through that experience. So you don't have to be grew up on the res following traditional culture in order to do Indigenous research. It's about a framing of how you go about understanding things, uh, a- and that anyone can do. Um, it- it's just changing your mindset, I think, and changing the way you think about things.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that intentionality piece that you brought up when we first began. I'm curious. So you talked about the sort of positionality statement that you've seen sort of evolve in the literature when we were writing up our manuscripts. Have you seen anything else that you're excited about, or or what do you hope to see next? Like, how do you hope research evolves in a way that works better for Indigenous health and well-being?
That's a good question. I guess this really comes down to what are my own hopes and dreams for research, right? Well, I think that so one of the things that I'm working on right now is how you do literature reviews better. So it's like I think, have started to be better at writing about or articulating to other people the importance of, say, like conversations with elders, the importance of that relationship with elders and gaining knowledge from elders. Um, but we haven't really documented yet how we could go about doing a literature review. How do you get information from written sources? And I think this might tie in. How do you get information from visual sources or from music or from our traditional songs and dances, our movement, and all those things, right? How does that shape our thinking? But a lot of people are doing, we understand this and we know this, but we just haven't written it down yet. So, but especially around written knowledge, how do we form a relationship with knowledge that's in writing in a good way? Like traditional forms of literature review, where you can like do a scoping review or whatever type of literature review you choose to do, they're all coming from Western mindset so far, or they have. They're not all, but a lot of it, the way that research is written up now, is sort of pushes it towards that way. So that's one of the things that we're working on right now is how to do a relational literature review. And I think it's talking with people and say, oh, well, actually, this is how it says you're doing stuff, but this is how you actually do it. That we are actually doing relational reviews, but just people haven't been writing about what's really happening when you're doing your literature review. Like, you're supposed to do these, have these search parameters and all these sort of things. But what it really comes down to oftentimes is like you talk to someone and they say, hey, read this. That's really cool. And so you get like a personal recommendation. So you have this link of a personal relationship to someone that is recommending something that you read. So when you read that, you're going to give that a bit more weight than something that you just found in a random search on Google Scholar. Or your supervisor tells you to read something. It's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I got to read that. So you give that a different weighting. You read the introduction, and someone does a good job of introducing yourself. So you think, hey, I'm going to pay attention to what they say a bit better than someone that totally didn't introduce themselves and just is writing about some random Indigenous community that you have no idea if they have the authority to write about it. So I'm going to like give way more weight to the ideas that come from that person that says how they're related to that community that they're working with. So it's starting to put things like that, those relational, I don't even know what you call it, but those relational things that are there in how we engage with literature, how we judge not necessarily the validity, but how we judge how much weight we're going to give to the information that's written down here. It's like, well, if 3 different people are writing 3 contradictory things, I'm going to probably believe the person most that tells me how they came to that information. I'm going to believe the person most that tells me how they are related to that information, shaped how they came to that information. So that's the stuff that I'm working on right now with my doctoral students is how to do a relational literature review. And it's kind of totally geek territory, but it's kind of fun.
I see you evolving our editorial review processes.
Oh, yeah. Well, and how we do ethics reviews as well. It's like, well, how you do an ethics review at a university totally has changed. And like most universities have already totally changed how they do ethics reviews. So that's good. But so it's like further evolving those into creating relational processes and ethics reviews. But also, it comes down to axiology, I guess, how you judge the worth of things. So how you judge the worth of information, but also how you judge the worth of things that are in writing. That's just one thing. I don't know, there's lots of other stuff.
This was excellent. It's given us definitely a lot of things to think about. I can see Mikas over there taking notes. And I have my own, mental tabs on these ideas that I think I knew. Some relationships being one of them that I'll go back to and keep turning over and expanding because of this. So, yeah, thank you, Shawn.
You're welcome. I'm trying to think, oh man, I didn't give Migas her practical. How do you put that into practice? I don't know.
No, you definitely did. I think about when you talk about relationships, and I think about it almost like a visual network. And like
Mhm.
you said with the literature reviews, where you're like, sometimes it's someone recommending somebody to somebody, right? Read this. This was really good. This might relate, whatever it might be. You are in so many of our networks. Everybody recommends your book. We read it, we study it, it becomes a part of us. And I'm even getting a little bit of chills because it it is so important for us to have a mentor like you, even in book form, while we're going through this process of getting our degrees, getting into research, doing research with our communities. So really, miigwech for that, and miigwech for having this conversation with us today. We really appreciate your time and hope we can talk again soon. I think the other thing you made me think about was how important it should be that we create spaces where we can have conversations that no one else hears outside of our Indigenous ears around these topics that we don't get to do enough, or maybe I don't get it out enough, but we should do that, right?
And I think you have different styles of conversations too. Like you have a different style of conversation when you're in like a ceremonial setting, right? You also have a different style of conversation when you're talking amongst a bunch of Indigenous people, but you also have a different style of conversation when you're talking to a bunch of IndigiNerds. Right? And that's important.
IndigiNerd.
Yes,
I like it.
IndigiNerds, yay.
We appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shawn. You have been listening to Tending Our Roots with Indigenous Methodologies. We are your hosts, Jill Fish, Tuscarora Nation.
And Migas Gonzalez, Lakudere Ojibwe. This podcast was funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and supported by the Circle P50 Center of Excellence, funded through the National Institute on Drug Abuse of the National Institutes of Health. The content is solely the responsibility of the hosts and their guests and does not necessarily represent the official views of their funders.
Production of this season was made possible by solar-powered studios in what is now known as St. Paul, Minnesota, on Dakota homelands. Podcast artwork was completed by Marlena Miles, a Spirit Lake, Dakota, Mohegan, and Muskogee artist. Our theme song, Best of Me, is used with the permission of Anishinaabe and First Nations singer-songwriter Leonard Sumner. You can find more detailed information in our show notes.
Miigwech for listening.
Nyawa.
If you'd seen the dark that I've seen and the struggle, you wouldn't walk another mile on your own.